Today I thought we would talk about the topic of permanent fountain pen inks. I have talked about that, I think, twice that I remember in Consult the Doctors. People are not always aware that on my website is an index to those videos with a short description of the topics I've covered in that specific episode. However, I asked for input on what you want me to talk about on Instagram, and permanent inks came up again. So this is in no way a complaint. To the contrary, I would say if multiple people on multiple occasions bring up a topic, then I think it's active in people's minds. It's something they think about. So here we go. A video just on permanent fountain pen inks and what I have learned about them through the years. So what I will say first is there are, in my mind, 3 types of permanent inks. The first is India ink. And India ink is a very specific ink, has pigment particles in it, so not dye, but pigment particles, bigger particles in other words. Completely waterproof, beautiful, profoundly black, dark ink. And again, once it's dry, completely waterproof. You can submerge paper in water, will not run. However, not suitable for fountain pens. That is meant to be used with dip pens and dip pens only. And people, I mean, some people paint with it, but I mean, in the context of writing, dip nibs only. The pigment particles, and I think, I haven't made a scientific study of this, but I think it's the agent they put in the ink so that it fixes to the paper that really clogs up feeds. So don't do it. Don't even try it, because I can tell you now, it's not going to work. Your pen will be clogged and you have to disassemble it entirely. I hope you'll be able to clean the feed. Second type of permanent ink has also been around for a very long time, and that is iron gall ink, or for the American friends, iron gall ink. Iron gall ink is made, I don't want to go about the whole process of how it's made because I can't tell you from the top of my head, but I do know that gall nuts, made by a specific type of wasp, is used in creating that ink. If you ever have a chance to watch the movie The Secret of Kells, it's a very cute animated movie about the Book of Kells, which is a famous manuscript. Iron gall ink is mentioned in that, which is kind of cute. Now, iron gall ink, I have here 2 bottles. These were made by a colleague of mine. She gave them to me. She makes it in the traditional fashion. I haven't tried these yet, but I will probably today. Put it in a not too expensive pen, just see what happens. Iron gall ink is very interesting because when you write with it, it is a almost grayish color, but it dries up to something very dark blue-black. Also permanent, waterproof, beautiful. There is a company called S.R.E, E-S-S-R-I, Ecclesiastic Supply something in the UK. They sell fairly large bottles of it because, as I understand it, maybe this has changed now, but up to a couple of years ago, in the UK, official government documents still had to be signed with iron gall ink. Now, iron gall ink is a controversial topic because some people claim it's not good for your fountain pens. A lot of people, they're saying this. Anyway, so what I would do if I were you is be very careful, and that's going to be the theme for this whole video. Iron gall ink is available from fountain pen manufacturers. For example, now hear me out. Mont Blanc Midnight Blue used to be iron gall ink, but they have changed their formulation, and it is now whatever it is, but not iron gall ink. On the one hand, one could use that as an argument for, well, then surely it must be safe in fountain pens if Mont Blanc tells you, hey, you can put this in our very expensive pens. But then they changed the formulation, didn't they? So, in other words, maybe it's not. Now, that S.R.E company that I mentioned before, I do this because it's fairly big bottles of iron gall they sell. I've used it in pens. I've used it in many pens. I have never had issues with it, but people sometimes say that when they use iron gall ink, their feeds clog, or if you have plastic feeds, they even melt. Over time, they get gooey and gunky, and they kind of, the fins at the bottom, I call them fins, some people call them cones, they sort of fuse and clump together. It's not pretty. There are other companies that do offer iron gall ink. Again, the traditional is kind of that dark blue-black, but I think that it's Rohre und Klingner. I think they make an iron gall. They make some iron galls in slightly different colors too. Again, if it's labeled as a fountain pen ink, you would assume that it's safe, but not every fountain pen ink is. I have definitely had an experience with one particular Noodler's ink that destroyed a fountain pen. That was sold as a fountain pen ink, but it liquefied a rubber diaphragm in my pen. So clearly it was not safe to be used with fountain pens. I'm not getting into the whole Noodler's argument here. No, that brand has very, very staunch supporters, and that's fine. For me, after that experience, I was done with the brand. Other people, different experiences, so I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just saying that was my experience. Do with it what you will. Again, if an ink is marketed as a fountain pen ink, you would assume it would be safe, but the reality is it's not always the case. So I'll come to, so then what do you do? So I will not say iron gall is safe. I'm also not saying it's unsafe, because I've used it for many years in different pens with plastic feeds. I've never had issues, but how I did that, I'll get to in a second. The final class of permanent inks are inks that are labeled permanent. Mont Blanc, I don't know if they still make it, but they had permanent black and blue at some point. Rohre und Klingner have some permanent inks. B.R.E, I think their ink is called Document with a K. It's document ink. I really needed to translate that, didn't I? Anyway, these are fountain pen inks sold as fountain pen inks, and they are meant to be archival quality permanent inks. I've used some of them. I've not used all of them. I have used Rohre und Klingner. I'm fairly sure. I've definitely used B.R.E. I remember those very intense blue ink in a bottle. It looks really intense, almost like a gouache or something, like very interesting. And kind of likewise with Mont Blanc. I've used their black, I've used their blue. Those are really marketed as fountain pen inks, and I'm not talking about the Rohre und Klingner. The Salix, for example, I think is their iron gall ink. They have a couple of those, again, different colors. Now I'm talking about actual permanent inks. And now in my mind I'm doubting a bit about Rohre und Klingner, but I know for a fact B.R.E, Mont Blanc, they had them. And there's other companies too. I think Noodler's has also made a permanent ink. There are brands that have them. I now want to say Diamine also had their iron gall ink, but I'm blanking a little bit. It doesn't really matter. You can find that out online. The question that I want to answer is, but are they safe or not? I will say that with those inks I have used, again, Mont Blanc permanent ink, B.R.E. permanent ink, I've not had any issues. I simply have not, nor have I had issues with iron gall ink. However, you need to understand the product you are working with, and that should go without saying, but I find that in this day and age, it's not something that goes without saying. And I say this without any arrogance or ego. You need to understand the product you are working with. A permanent ink is permanent for a reason, whether that is a specific binding agent they use, because what is an ink? It's water, it's dye, it's typically an antifungal or some sort of, I think antifungal is the word I was looking for, to make sure that nothing grows in the ink. And yet, sometimes things do grow in ink. I've had that experience with B.R.E. I've stopped using B.R.E. Look, I'm not against Noodler's, I'm just against inks that do bad things. Okay, so B.R.E. I stopped using because a couple times had bottles, not particularly old, put a pen in, pulled it out, and a string of goo was hanging from it. So that ink has gone off, right? And this can also happen with other inks, but B.R.E. kind of prides itself on using these really natural dyes, etc. Anyway, dye, water, some sort of antifungal agent typically, and a binding agent. Because if you only have dye and water, it will not stick to the page. So usually there is some agent in that ink to make it bind to the page. I assume, and I've not made a big study of this, I assume that with the permanent inks it's that binding agent that's special, and maybe there's something in it along the lines of not dye but pigment, sorry, bigger particles. That's what happens again in East Indian ink. So, if you are dealing with a product that is marketed as being permanent, that could stain pens. If you put an ink like that in a clear pen, especially if it's something expensive, I'm just going to throw something out there, Pelikan M1005, demonstrator version of the M1000, that's an expensive pen. If you're going to put a permanent ink in that, and you know that the entire body is clear, I mean of the pen, not the ink, there could be stains, because it's a permanent ink. So be sensible about what you put that in. If you have really expensive pens, or even pens that are not expensive but that you really cherish, maybe permanent inks are not to be put in those pens. Now again, I have put iron gall ink in yard lead pens and I've never had issues. Why not? Because I clean my pens. And I'm very diligent about that. And I'm not trying to be funny, and definitely not trying to be lectury and telling people what to do, but I definitely know pen people who clean their pens once every 1 or 2 years. If that's your habit, hey, that's awesome if that works for you. But then a permanent ink might not be a great idea. If you use your permanent ink and you clean your pen diligently every time your converter or reservoir, whatever filling system that pen has, is empty, I don't know, you would have an enormous issue. India ink is still out. That will never work. It'll clog your feed straight away. When it comes to iron gall inks, again, having done that, I've never had issues. But there are great pen people out there, like, let's say, Richard Binder, who has restored pens for many, many, many years, who has seen every possible problem with every possible pen you can think of. He has talked about specific inks not working with feeds, melting them. Look on his page, richardspens.com, I want to say, but if you Google Richard Binder pens, you'll find him. Look at some of the terrifying pictures. Some inks are just not great. So, I feel that some permanent inks you can absolutely use, but just be sensible. Be sensible how about you clean your pen. I've never had them damage a pen irreparably. Speaking of something like a Pelikan M1000, you can unscrew the nib unit, you can take a little Q-tip, dilute bleach, 1 part bleach, and I would say 9 parts water, approximately. Dip it in, scrub the inside, flush it really well with water afterwards, and most discoloration is gone. But if you don't want that, if you're very nervous about your pen discoloring, for me, things always come back to the words of the great Paul Rutte, who was the shop manager at Akkerman in The Hague, who said, if that's your concern, you should only use washable blue. And he's right. That's the solution to all your problems. If you're worried about pens discoloring, washable blue only. May not be the most inspired color range you use, but you won't have any issues ever. And I'm not ridiculing anyone. If you're really concerned, do that. You'll never have a problem. But once you get to more and more saturated inks, whether it's the heavy reds, Mont Blanc Corn Poppy, I love it. It's a beautiful, bright, intense red. But when I've emptied my pen, it gets cleaned surgically. Not because it's ever stained anything, but because I don't want it to stain anything, and it's a very saturated ink, so I clean my pen well. But frankly, I do that after washable blue too. If you practice good pen hygiene, I don't know what the issue is. But if you have that fear, washable blue. It's delicious. Because it'll never be an issue. So, exercise common sense. Don't be too afraid. Pens are meant to be used. But if you have, again, common sense, if you have a demonstrator and you put in an incredibly saturated ink, staining is more likely than if you were to use a washable blue. Have I made this point adequately? I don't think it's particularly complicated. It's just a thing to think about. And that's it. So my opinion on permanent inks, sorry this was so long, but I tried to cover different aspects, is they're probably fine if they're sold as fountain pen inks. Iron gall is a little dodgy. I'll grant you that. India ink should never go on a fountain pen or near it. I think it's something like, what is it, platinum, the carbon black. Another beautiful ink. Basically waterproof. I think it's a pigment. It has pigment in it, not dye, but pigment, bigger particles. I put that in pens. Never had an issue. But I've seen it stain nibs. So when I'm done with that ink, I clean the pen really well. And sometimes it's very simple. You take the softest baby toothbrush you can find and you gently brush the nib a little bit and any stains come off. Okay. But again, would I put that in an expensive demonstrator that I cannot take apart? Probably not. Common sense. Crime is common. Logic is rare. Sherlock Holmes. Okay, I hope that was useful. Let me know if you have any other things you would like me to talk about, and I shall make every effort to do so. Thank you so much for watching. I'll gladly see you later. Bye!